had studied grief across 300 species over the course of 2 centuries. They considered themselves an expert on the subject. Loss, after all, followed predictable patterns throughout the galaxy. They entered hibernation chambers when grief struck, sleeping until the pain faded into distant memory. The created genetic duplicates of the deceased, replacing them so seamlessly that life continued without interruption. The On simply edited their collective consciousness, removing all traces of those who had died as if they had never existed at all. Every species had found efficient ways to manage death. It was a universal constant, like gravity or entropy, and intelligent beings had developed logical responses to it. Research had confirmed this truth again and again. That's why they felt confident when the Galactic Psychological Institute assigned them to study humanity, a newly contacted species from a blue planet in an unremarkable solar system. The first human memorial service observed confused them completely. A human male named Thomas had died at the age of 87, and his family gathered in a building specifically designed for mourning. Watched from their observation equipment as dozens of humans assembled, many of them crying openly. This part made sense. Most species experienced immediate emotional distress at loss. What happened next did not make sense at all. Instead of employing techniques to minimize their pain, the humans deliberately amplified it. They stood one by one and told stories about Thomas, recalling specific memories in vivid detail. They shared moments from decades past, laughing and crying simultaneously. They displayed images of Thomas at various ages, forcing themselves to confront his absence over and over again. One woman sang a song that Thomas had apparently loved, her voice breaking multiple times. Assistant Myras monitored the biological readings. Their cortisol levels are elevated, she reported. Heart rates increased. Neural activity shows pain centers activating repeatedly. Why are they doing this to themselves? Didn't have an answer. The ritual continued for hours. At the end, the humans transported Thomas's body to another location and buried it in the ground, marking the spot with a stone carved with his name and the years he had lived. They promised to return to this spot regularly. Fascinating, murmured, and concerning. Over the following weeks, the research team expanded their observations. They discovered that this wasn't an isolated practice. Humans had developed entire industries around death. They created lasting monuments, some stretching hundreds of feet into the air. They designated specific days each year for remembering the dead. They wore items of clothing in dark colors to signal their grief to others. They kept photographs of deceased loved ones in their homes, sometimes talking to these images as if the dead could hear them. The team observed a woman named who visited a cemetery every Sunday to place flowers on her mother's grave. Her mother had been dead for 15 years, yet continued this ritual without fail. She would sit beside the stone marker and speak aloud, updating her mother on events in her life, asking for advice she would never receive, crying tears for someone who could offer no comfort. This is pathological, declared during a team meeting. Most species process acute grief within days or weeks. Humans are extending their suffering for years, decades even. Some of them never stop. Myra's pulled up additional data. It gets stranger. They pass memories of the dead to the next generation. Children are taught about grandparents and great-grandparents they never met. They're inheriting grief for losses they didn't personally experience. The evidence mounted. In human cities, plaques commemorated people who had died centuries ago. Educational institutions taught students about historical figures long deceased, encouraging emotional connections to the long dead. Humans wrote books, composed music, and created art dedicated to people who would never experience these tributes. They built museums to preserve the belongings of the dead, treating worn clothing and used tools as sacred objects. Documented a human holiday called Memorial Day, where an entire nation paused normal activities to honor dead soldiers. Parks filled with families visiting graves. Flags flew at half height. Moments of silence were observed. The deceased had been gone for years, decades, even centuries in some cases, yet millions of humans participated in synchronized mourning. They're trapped in a cycle, concluded. Unable to move forward, unable to let go. Every species we've studied has found ways to continue efficiently after loss. Humans seem incapable of this basic psychological function. The team prepared their preliminary report. The classification was clear. Humanity suffered from a species-wide inability to process death in healthy ways. They were emotionally fragile, prone to extended periods of dysfunction following loss, and had developed cultural practices that reinforced rather than resolved their grief. The recommendation would be controversial but necessary. Perhaps humanity needed psychological intervention from more advanced species, guidance on how to handle death more efficiently. Myra's, however, found herself hesitating. Something about the classification felt incomplete. Yes, humans extended their grief far beyond what seemed logical. Yes, they built their entire culture around remembering the dead. But she had noticed something else during their observations, something that didn't fit the pattern of pathology. She reviewed footage of the woman who visited her mother's grave weekly. After crying and talking to the stone marker, always stood, wiped her eyes, and went a volunteer at a community center. When asked why she did this work, explained that her mother had been passionate about helping others, and continuing this work made her feel connected to her mother's values. Myra's found similar patterns elsewhere. A man named James who had lost his brother in a fire had become a firefighter himself. A woman named ran a scholarship fund in her deceased daughter's name, helping dozens of young people attend university. A community that had experienced a tragedy 20 years prior gathered annually, not just to mourn, but to renew their commitment to preventing similar tragedies. These humans spoke about their dead constantly, yes. They carried their grief visibly, yes. But they were also among the most purposeful, driven individuals in their communities. The weight they carried seemed to push them forward rather than hold them back. Myra's requested permission to conduct deeper interviews, to go beyond passive observation. Granted it reluctantly. Document their struggles, instructed. We need a complete picture of how this grief dysfunction manifests in daily life. But Myra suspected she might document something entirely different. She had spent 2 centuries studying loss across the galaxy, learning all the efficient ways intelligent beings managed death. Maybe it was time to understand why one species had chosen a completely different path. The next day, Myra's prepared her questions and set out to speak with humans directly. She wanted to understand what her instruments and observations couldn't fully capture. Why did humans choose to remember? What did they gain from refusing to forget? And most importantly, what had every other species in the galaxy missed about the nature of loss itself? The answers, she suspected, would challenge everything the Galactic Psychological Institute thought it knew about grief, death, and the way intelligent beings were supposed to move forward. Humans were either suffering from a collective psychological disorder, or they had discovered something profound that the rest of the galaxy had overlooked for. Myra's intended to find out which. Myra sat across from Dr. Sarah in a small coffee shop in Portland. The elderly woman stirred her tea slowly, her weathered hands steady despite her 83 years. On the table between them sat a photograph in a simple frame. A man with kind eyes smiled at the camera, his arm around a much younger Sarah. "That's," Sarah said, noticing Myra's gaze. "My husband. He died 26 years ago." Myra's had reviewed Sarah's file before this meeting. Doctor was a leading researcher in renewable energy, holder of 17 patents, and director of a research institute that employed over 200 people. She was, by any measure, highly functional. Yet she carried a photograph of her deceased husband with her daily and spoke about him in present tense regularly. "Tell me about him," Myra said, her translator converting her words to English. Sarah's face brightened immediately. Was an environmental activist back when that was still considered radical. He believed humanity had a responsibility to the planet, to future generations. He spent his whole life fighting for clean water, clean air, protection of wilderness. She paused, her smile turning sad. He died before he could see most of his dreams realized. And yet you continue his work, Myers observed. I continue our work, Sarah corrected gently. Gave me purpose. When I'm in the lab trying to solve some impossible problem with solar efficiency, I think about what he would say. When I want to give up, I remember his determination. She touched the photograph lightly. He's been gone for over 2 decades, but he's with me every single day. Myra struggled to understand. Doesn't that hurt, keeping his memory so close? Sarah considered this. Yes, sometimes it hurts terribly. There are mornings I wake up and forget for a moment that he's gone, and remembering feels like losing him all over again. She met Myra's eyes. But the hurt means something. It reminds me that what we had was real, that his life mattered, that the love we shared wasn't temporary or disposable. The pain is the price I pay to keep him with me. Over the following weeks, Myra's conducted dozens of similar interviews. She spoke with a firefighter named James whose brother had died in a warehouse blaze when James was 15. I think about Danny every time I respond to a call, James told her. He's why I do this job. He's why I'm good at it. I carry him with me into every burning building. She interviewed whose daughter had died in a car accident at age 17, had established a scholarship fund that had helped 43 students attend college. Wanted to be a teacher, explained. She wanted to help young people discover their potential. Now she helps them through me. Her dream didn't die with her. Myers attended a veterans memorial on a rainy November morning. Thousands of humans gathered at a cemetery, standing between rows of white markers. A young man in military uniform placed flowers at a grave and whispered, "I made sergeant just like you did. I hope I'm making you proud." An elderly woman touched a name carved in stone and said, 60 years, my love. I kept my promise. I'm still here." The ceremony included a reading of names. One by one, humans spoke the names of the dead aloud. Some had died last year. Others had died decades ago. The crowd responded to each name with the same words, present, as if claiming that those who lived in memory were still, in some sense, there. Myers felt something shift in her understanding. These humans weren't trapped by their grief. They were transformed by it. The dead weren't weights dragging them down, but foundations lifting them up. Every tear shed was an act of defiance against forgetting. Every story told was a declaration that love transcends death. Every life lived in honor of those lost was proof that ending and extinction were different things. She began documenting what her people had no word for: legacy. Humans had discovered that death doesn't erase meaning, it crystallizes it. The dead become ideals to live up to, dreams to fulfill, love to carry forward. They transform from living, flawed individuals into guiding lights that illuminate the path ahead. Myers attended a high school graduation where the principal announced a special award in honor of a teacher who had died 3 years earlier. Ms. believed every student had potential, the principal said. She saw greatness in each of you before you saw it in yourselves. The scholarship recipient, accepting the award with tears in her eyes, promised to become a teacher herself. One life ended, but the impact rippled outward, touching dozens, then hundreds, then potentially thousands more. She visited a children's hospital where an entire wing was named after a 6-year-old boy who had died of cancer. His parents had raised millions for research. Only lived 6 years, his mother told Myers. But because we remember him, because we honor him, his life has meaning beyond those 6 years. He's saving other children. He's still here, still fighting, still making a difference. Myers' report began to diverge dramatically from S. Where saw dysfunction, Myers saw profound purpose. Where documented psychological fragility, Myers found strength of a kind other species had never developed. Humans had turned grief into a tool for meaning-making. death into a catalyst for growth, loss into a foundation for legacy. The research team met to reconcile their contradictory findings, insisted that humans were suffering needlessly, extending pain that could be efficiently managed. Myers argued that humans had discovered something revolutionary, a way to transform death from an ending into a continuation. They weep for people they never met, pointed out. They build monuments to the long dead. They organize their entire society around honoring those who can no longer contribute anything. Exactly, Myers countered. They've found a way to make death not matter, not in the sense that it doesn't hurt, but in the sense that it doesn't end what matters, the sleep until they forget, the replace the lost, the delete them from memory. But humans make the dead immortal. The team remained split. They needed something decisive, some observation that would prove which interpretation was correct. Was humanity's relationship with death a species-wide pathology requiring intervention, or a profound philosophical achievement the galaxy needed to learn from? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, and from an unexpected source. News reached Earth of first contact with another species, whose orbited a dying star. Their sun would go nova within 5 years, and despite the galactic community's best efforts, full evacuation was impossible. They would survive as a species, but their civilization, their world, their culture would be completely destroyed. The research team received permission to observe humanity's response to this crisis. Here was the ultimate test. How would humans, with their strange relationship with loss, react to an entire civilization facing extinction? The observation would prove to be the most important of Myers' career. The galactic community's response to the crisis was practical and efficient. They offered their evacuation ships, capable of transporting thousands. They provided genetic banking technology to preserve biological diversity. They contributed resources for establishing new colonies. Every species brought their particular expertise to the problem of survival. The mathematics were brutal. The numbered 8 billion. Even with every available ship, only 5 million could be evacuated before their sun's final collapse. Priorities were established: genetic diversity, essential knowledge, critical skills. The rest would die when their world burned. Watched as human delegates arrived at the Galactic Council station. They brought no evacuation ships. Their technology was still generations behind the rest of the community. What could they possibly offer? Ambassador Williams, a gray-haired woman with tired eyes, addressed the council. "We can't save your world," she said to the representatives. "We can't stop your son from dying, but we can promise you something else. We can promise that you won't be forgotten." The representative, an elderly being named L, tilted his head in confusion. "Forgotten? Every species here is focused on who survives," Williams continued. "We want to focus on what survives. Your culture, your history, your art, your philosophy, your stories. The civilization won't die if we remember it." The council chamber fell silent. Several species exchanged confused glances. The delegate spoke up. "With respect, Ambassador, the need evacuation ships, not sentiment." Williams nodded. "They need both. We're offering what we can give." She turned back to Elle. "We would like to send documentary teams to your world, to record everything. Your cities, your art galleries, your museums, your schools. We want to interview your people, record your music, preserve your literature. We want to learn your philosophy, understand your values, document your dreams." "For what purpose?" Elle asked. "So that 1,000 years from now, when humans study history, they'll learn about so your culture becomes part of our culture, so your stories are taught to our children, so your art hangs in our museums, so your philosophy influences our thinking." Williams's voice grew stronger. "Physical death is inevitable, but death of memory, that's a choice, and we choose to remember." Myers watched as understanding spread across Elle's features. This was the human approach to death, applied on a scale. Not acceptance, not replacement, but defiant remembrance. The humans moved quickly. Within weeks, hundreds of documentary teams descended on the. They walked through ancient cities, recording architecture that had stood for. They sat with elders, recording oral histories passed down through generations. They attended concerts, preserving musical traditions. They studied art, philosophy, mathematics, poetry. Myra's joined one team, observing as a human named David interviewed a poet named Ra. She was old even by standards, her scales dulled with age, but her mind remained sharp. "Tell me about your work," David asked, camera recording. Ra recited poetry in her native language, the translator struggling with metaphors that had no human equivalent. She spoke of star seasons and light songs, of concepts humans had never encountered. David listened with complete attention, asking questions, requesting clarification, ensuring every nuance was captured. "Why does this matter to you?" Ra asked. "I will be dead soon, my world will be dust. What good are my words?" David met her eyes. "Because your words deserve to exist. Because you created beauty and beauty shouldn't die. Because 1,000 years from now, a human child might read your poetry and feel what you felt, understand what you understood. You won't be gone. You'll be remembered." Tears fell from Ra's eyes, something rarely displayed. "We face extinction with calmness," she whispered. "We accept death as the inevitable end. But you humans, you refuse to let anything truly end." The work continued for months. Human universities established studies programs. Museums built wings dedicated to art. Schools incorporated history into curricula. Composers created symphonies blending human and musical traditions. Authors wrote books exploring philosophy. On Earth in Washington, D.C., humans built a memorial, a massive structure of white stone carved with script. Inside, interactive displays taught visitors about culture. Holographic projections showed their cities, their people, their daily lives. An eternal flame burned at the center, the human tradition for honoring those lost. Observed all of this with growing amazement. They had spent centuries studying death, and they finally understood what they had been missing. Every species they had studied treated death as an ending to be managed efficiently. Minimize pain, continue functioning, move forward. It was logical, practical, efficient. But humans had discovered something the rest of the galaxy had overlooked. Death only ends life, not meaning. The dead continue in memory, in legacy, in the lives they touched. Forgetting the dead doesn't ease pain, it wastes it. Humans transformed grief into fuel, loss into purpose, death into a challenge they refused to accept. The final evacuation ships left the 72 hours before the sun's collapse. El was among the last to leave. Before boarding, he met with Ambassador Williams one final time. "My people have discussed your work," he said. "We don't fully understand it. We accept death. We always have, it seemed. Easier." "Easier," Williams agreed, "but not better." "No," El said softly. "Not better." He paused, struggling with emotion. "A young human visited me last week. A child, no more than 8 years old. She told me she had learned about thee in school. She said her favorite artist was. She promised me that when she grows up, she'll make sure people never forget us." His voice broke. "I have lived for 200 years. I have created, loved, lost. I thought I understood death. But that child's promise, it changes everything. For the first time, I believe that my civilization's end is not truly an ending." Williams embraced him, the gesture awkward between their different physiologies but sincere. "You're not going extinct," she said firmly. "Your world is dying, but you're not. Every human who learns your language, studies your art, reads your philosophy, carries you forward. You're immortal now. We won't let you die." Myra's watched the exchange and knew her report would reshape galactic understanding of death, grief, and memory. Humans hadn't failed to develop efficient coping mechanisms. They had discovered something better, a way to make death meaningless through the power of remembrance. The sun collapsed 3 days later. The burned. 8 billion souls died. but their civilization lived on, preserved in human memory, human art, human culture. Every year afterward, humans observed Remembrance Day. Schools taught their history. Musicians performed their songs. Children learned their language. The Galactic Psychological Institute published in Myra's joint report. It created an entirely new field of study, legacy psychology. Other species began tentatively experimenting with remembrance. They built their first memorial. The tried preserving memories alongside genes. The unquestioned whether forgetting the dead was truly logical. Humanity's approach to death spread slowly across the galaxy. It was harder than efficient grief management, more painful than replacement or forgetting. But it offered something no other method could, the promise that love, remembered, transcends death itself. El lived another 30 years. When he died, humans held a memorial service. Thousands attended, most of them humans who had never met him. They told stories about his people, sang songs, recited poetry. They wept for a being from another world, for a civilization lost to fire, for a culture that lived now only in memory. And in that weeping, in that remembrance, in that refusal to forget, El and all his people achieved what no amount of evacuation could provide: true immortality. Not of body, but of meaning. Not of life, but of legacy. Myra's attended the service. She understood now what made humans extraordinary. Every other species in the galaxy had learned to accept death. Only humans had learned to defeat it.